think about it as a defend the title, get the title. I want to win every fight against the best guys, and this just comes along with it. So I'm just blessed tonight, and just want to say thanks.
You know what? You can trash talk all you want. I mean, we're gonna fight, so that's pretty much it. You know, I don't talk shit, so that's it.
He was once considered the most dominant heavyweight in mixed martial arts, a fighter who didn't just win, but controlled every second inside the cage. But today, the story of Cain Velasquez is no longer just about championships or legacy. It's about a situation that has completely changed how the public views him. As of now, Velasquez's name is tied to a serious legal case that has drawn attention far beyond the MMA community. What makes it more complex is the context behind the incident, a situation involving his family that quickly escalated into something much bigger. From a purely factual standpoint, this is no longer a sports story. It's a legal and personal crisis involving one of the most respected figures the heavyweight division has ever seen. And that contrast is what stands out. On one side, there's the image of a former UFC champion, a fighter known for relentless pressure, elite conditioning, and a style that overwhelmed even the toughest opponents. On the other, there's the current reality. Court proceedings, public debate, and a divided reaction from fans and fighters alike. Some see his actions as completely unjustifiable. Others believe the situation is more complicated than it appears. And that divide has only intensified the conversation around his legacy. Because when an athlete reaches this level of recognition, their actions outside the sport begin to carry just as much weight as what they achieved inside it. To understand how things reached this point, it's important to go back to where it all started. Before the titles, before the controversy, when Cain Velasquez was just beginning his journey into professional fighting. Before becoming a dominant force in MMA, Cain Velasquez built his foundation in wrestling, a discipline that would later define his entire fighting style. He competed at a high level in collegiate wrestling, representing Arizona State University. During his time there, he developed a reputation for endurance, pressure, and consistency, traits that don't always stand out immediately but become critical over time. Unlike many fighters who rely on explosive moments, Velasquez's approach was built around control. He wasn't just trying to win exchanges, he was trying to dominate positioning, pace, and output across every round. After transitioning into mixed martial arts in the mid-2000s, his progression was unusually fast. Within just a few fights, it became clear that his skill set was translating effectively. His wrestling allowed him to dictate where the fight took place, while his cardio gave him an advantage that most heavyweights simply couldn't match. By the time he entered the UFC, expectations were already building. At that point, the heavyweight division was known for knockout power, but often criticized for slower pace and limited endurance. Velasquez introduced something different, a pressure-based style that forced opponents to fight at a tempo they weren't comfortable with. Early in his UFC run, he began to separate himself quickly. His performances weren't just wins, they were controlled, one-sided displays. Opponents struggled to deal with his pace, his clinch work, and his ability to maintain pressure over extended periods. From an analytical perspective, this was the phase where his identity as a fighter became clear. He wasn't just another contender entering the division, he was a stylistic problem that few heavyweights had an answer for. And it wouldn't take long before that momentum led him to the highest level of the sport. By the time Cain Velasquez reached title contention, the heavyweight division was already stacked with elite names. But what set him apart wasn't just skill, it was how consistently he imposed his style against top-level competition. His first major breakthrough came against Brock Lesnar, who at the time was one of the biggest stars in the sport. Heading into that fight, Lesnar's size, wrestling background, and physical strength were seen as major advantages. But the outcome told a different story. Velasquez controlled the pace from the opening exchange. His striking pressure disrupted Lesnar's rhythm, and once the fight moved into close range, the difference in composure and conditioning became clear. The result was a decisive finish that marked a shift in the division. From that point forward, Velasquez wasn't just a contender, he was the standard. What followed was a series of high-level matchups, particularly his rivalry with Junior Dos Santos. Across multiple fights, their contrasting styles created a clear narrative, power versus pressure. In their first meeting, Velasquez suffered a quick loss, but the rematches showed a different dynamic. He adjusted his approach, increased his output, and used sustained pressure to neutralize Dos Santos' striking advantage. Over time, these performances reinforced a key pattern. The longer the fight went, the more it favored Velasquez. Statistically, his output and control metrics stood out for the division. High strike volume, effective takedowns, and top control made him one of the most complete heavyweights of his era. At his peak, he wasn't just winning fights, he was breaking opponents down over time, and for a period it looked like his dominance could continue without interruption, but that momentum wouldn't last forever. At his peak, Cain Velasquez looked almost untouchable, but beneath that dominance, there were early signs of a problem that would eventually define the later stage of his career: durability. Unlike many heavyweights who rely on short bursts, Velasquez's style demanded constant pressure. High output, relentless movement, and repeated grappling exchanges placed significant strain on his body over time, and gradually that cost started to show. A series of injuries began to interrupt his momentum. Shoulder issues, knee problems, and back complications limited not just his activity, but also his ability to maintain consistency at the highest level. From an analytical perspective, inactivity became one of the biggest factors affecting his career trajectory. Long gaps between fights made it difficult to sustain rhythm, especially in a division where timing and reaction speed are critical. During this period, the heavyweight division itself was evolving. New contenders were entering with more well-rounded skill sets, and the pace of competition was increasing. Fighters were becoming more adaptive, better at defending takedowns, managing pressure, and capitalizing on small openings. For Velasquez, returning from injury meant facing opponents who had already adjusted to the style he once used to dominate. The difference wasn't always dramatic, but it was noticeable. His performances, while still competitive, lacked the same consistency that defined his earlier run. Moments of control were still there, but they were harder to sustain over full fights. And in a division where small margins can decide outcomes, that shift mattered. At this stage, the narrative around his career began to change. It was no longer just about dominance, it was about whether he could stay active and whether his body could keep up with the demands of his own fighting style. And as time went on, those questions became harder to answer. In 2022, the narrative around Cain Velasquez shifted completely, moving from sport into a serious legal situation. According to publicly reported information, the incident began with allegations involving a member of his family. These allegations led to an ongoing investigation, which set the context for everything that followed. Shortly after, Velasquez was involved in a high-speed pursuit targeting an individual connected to that case. During the incident, multiple shots were fired from a vehicle. One of those shots struck another individual who was not the intended target. The situation escalated quickly, leading to Velasquez being taken into custody. From a legal standpoint, the charges were significant. They included attempted murder and related offenses, placing the case well beyond anything typically associated with professional athletes. As a result, the story gained national attention, extending far outside the MMA community. What makes this situation complex is the context behind it. On one side, there are the legal facts, actions that resulted in serious criminal charges. On the other, there is the underlying situation involving his family, which shaped public perception in a very different way. This dual perspective created a divide. Some observers focused strictly on the legal aspect, emphasizing accountability and due process. Others viewed the situation through a more personal lens, considering the emotional factors that may have influenced his actions. From an analytical standpoint, both perspectives contributed to how the story developed in the public space. And unlike a fight inside the cage, this wasn't a situation with a clear outcome or immediate resolution. It was ongoing, complex, and highly scrutinized, and it marked a turning point that would redefine how his career and his legacy would be viewed moving forward. Following the incident, the immediate focus shifted to the legal process surrounding Cain Velasquez. He remained in custody for a period of time before being granted conditional release, with restrictions placed on his movement and activities. Court proceedings became the central factor determining his near-term future, and any return to professional fighting was effectively put on hold. From a career standpoint, this created a complete interruption. Unlike injuries, which while serious, still allow for a potential comeback, legal cases operate on a different timeline. Outcomes are uncertain, delays are common, and the situation can extend over months or even years. At the same time, public reaction continued to evolve. Within the MMA community, several fighters, coaches, and public figures expressed support for Velasquez, often referencing the context surrounding the incident. Some emphasized personal loyalty, while others highlighted the emotional factors involved. Outside of that circle, the response was more divided. There were strong arguments centered on legal accountability and the broader implications of the action actions taken. Discussions extended beyond sports, touching on issues related to responsibility, intent, and consequences. This contrast in perspectives played a major role in shaping the overall narrative. From an analytical standpoint, it showed how public opinion can vary significantly depending on context and individual interpretation. Meanwhile, the heavyweight division continued to move forward. New contenders emerged, title fights took place, and the competitive landscape evolved without him. Over time, the gap between his active career and the current state of the division became more pronounced. At this stage, the situation was no longer just about what happened. It was about what comes next, legally, professionally, and personally. And that uncertainty became the defining factor in how his story would continue. When evaluating the full career of Cain Velasquez, the challenge isn't in identifying his achievements, it's in reconciling them with everything that followed. From a performance standpoint, his impact on the heavyweight division is clear. At his peak, he introduced a style that combined pace, pressure, and endurance in a way that was uncommon for the weight class. His ability to maintain output over multiple rounds forced opponents into positions they weren't prepared for, and for a period of time, that approach defined the standard at the highest level. Statistically and stylistically, his prime remains one of the most dominant stretches in heavyweight MMA, but legacy is rarely based on performance alone. In this case, the legal situation fundamentally changes how his career is viewed. It adds a layer of complexity that goes beyond wins, losses, or championship titles. From an analytical perspective, it creates two parallel narratives. One focuses on his contributions to the sport, the evolution of heavyweight competition, and the level of dominance he achieved. The other centers on the events outside the cage, decisions that led to serious consequences and ongoing legal scrutiny. For audiences, reconciling those two narratives is not straightforward. Some will prioritize his achievements as an athlete, others will focus on the broader implications of his actions, and that division is likely to remain, because in situations like this, there isn't a single universally accepted conclusion. What remains is a case that continues to develop, and a legacy that is no longer defined by sport alone. In the end, the story of Cain Velasquez is not just about how a champion rose to the top, but how quickly everything can change.